Have you ever worked tirelessly, kept your dreams hidden, only to have those closest to you laugh at your every move? Imagine the moment when their mockery turns into disbelief, when your quiet success suddenly speaks louder than their doubts ever could. It was just another summer camping trip, where the family gathered around the fire, swapping stories and laughing. But for Patricia, each word from her father, Fred, felt like a reminder of how little he believed in her. "Still no job, Patricia?" he asked with a smirk, as the family chuckled in agreement. What they didn't know was that behind her quiet demeanor, Patricia had built a thriving digital marketing empire from scratch. The very same family who doubted her dreams would soon be forced to reckon with a reality they never saw coming. Patricia had just been named one of Forbes' top under 30 billionaires. But for Patricia, the true victory wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in finally embracing the power of her own success. For Patricia, the moment Fred had mocked her was nothing new. It was just another reminder of the years spent hiding her success from the world. What he and the rest of the family didn't realize was that while they saw her as a failure, she had been quietly working her way to the top. Her story wasn't one of overnight success. It was a slow, meticulous process. There was no grand announcement or applause when she first started her business. It had all begun when Patricia was still in college, a time when she didn't have the confidence to admit to anyone that she had big dreams of becoming an entrepreneur. In those early days, Patricia was just like any other young adult, unsure of her future and constantly seeking validation. But while most of her peers were out partying or focusing on traditional internships, Patricia spent her free time learning about digital marketing. She was self-taught, devouring books, attending webinars, and experimenting with building her own brand online. The struggle wasn't just about figuring out how to create a profitable business. It was about dealing with the doubt that echoed from every corner of her life, especially from Fred. The constant side hustle comments, the dismissive remarks about her not having a real job, they all took a toll on Patricia. But what Fred didn't know was that those very remarks were the fuel she needed. Every comment, every offhand joke about her unrealistic dreams pushed her to work harder. Each night, while the world slept, Patricia would pour her time into refining her digital marketing strategies, reaching out to clients, and working tirelessly on her craft. She kept it all under wraps, only sharing her progress with a few close friends who supported her. No one knew that Patricia wasn't just surviving, she was building something that would one day surpass all of their expectations. And even though she faced constant ridicule from her father, she never stopped believing in herself. At first, the business was slow. She faced rejection after rejection, and there were moments when she thought about giving up. But Patricia was determined to make it work. Slowly but surely, her efforts began to pay off. She landed her first big client, then another and another. Word of mouth spread, and soon enough, Patricia's online business became her full-time gig, earning her more than she ever imagined. The more she succeeded, the more she knew she had to keep it quiet. She didn't need validation from her family or friends. She was doing it for herself, not for their approval. But as the months passed and the success kept growing, the silence became harder to maintain. Every time Fred belittled her, she found herself fighting the urge to reveal her achievements, knowing full well that it would only be met with mockery. But everything changed the day she received the email that would alter the course of her life forever. It was an invitation from Forbes, informing her that she had been selected as one of the top under 30 billionaires for 2026. The email was short, but the impact was massive. It was everything she had worked for, all in one moment validation, not just from her family, but from the world. But even as her heart raced with excitement, a part of Patricia hesitated. She could reveal her success now, but would that be enough? Would the family who had doubted her for so long finally understand what she had built? Or would it only spark more jealousy, more ridicule? Patricia knew what she had to do, but the question remained: when? The next camping trip was fast approaching, and with it, another opportunity to finally show her family that success didn't come from following a rigid path. It came from daring to take a different route. She would have to choose the moment carefully. Patricia sat at her desk, the hum of the city outside her window blending with the quiet tapping of her fingers on the keyboard. She had just wrapped up another client meeting, another milestone in what was becoming a regular series of successes. Yet, despite everything, she couldn't shake the weight that had followed her since the last family camping trip. Her father's dismissive words echoed in her mind. "Still no job, Patricia?" It had been weeks since that moment, but it still stung. She had proven herself time and time again in her own world, but Fred's ridicule made her feel small. His voice was always in the back of her mind, making her doubt if she was really on the right path. Would they ever respect me for what I've built? She thought. Will they ever see me as anything more than the unrealistic dreamer they've always thought I was? Patricia's phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, and a small wave of excitement bubbled up as she noticed the subject line, Forbes Top 30 Under 30 Exclusive Invitation. She stared at it for a moment, unsure if she had actually seen what she thought she had. Could it be? Her breath caught in her throat as she quickly opened the email, her hands shaking ever so slightly as her eyes scanned the message. Dear Patricia, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as one of the Forbes Top Under 30 Billionaires for 2026. Her heart raced as she read and reread the words, unable to comprehend what was happening. The screen before her seemed to blur, her pulse pounding in her ears. This can't be real, she thought. She checked the sender's name again. Forbes. Forbes? She scrolled down, seeing the official invitation to the exclusive event, a gala where the top 30 under 30 would be celebrated. It felt as though the ground beneath her feet had suddenly shifted. All the sleepless nights, the endless hours spent perfecting her digital marketing strategies, the quiet successes she had hidden from her family, everything had led to this moment. Her fingers hovered over the screen, still unsure whether to believe it. Was this some kind of mistake? Was this real? She clicked on the link to verify the invitation. It took her to the Forbes website, where her name, bold and undeniable, appeared among the other top young billionaires. She scrolled through the list, her eyes wide as she took in the names of people she had only ever read about in magazines or seen on social media. This is real, she thought, finally letting the excitement wash over her. But just as quickly, a sense of dread followed. The recognition, the validation this was everything she had dreamed of. But it also meant exposing a secret she had carefully guarded for years. For so long, Patricia had kept her success hidden from her family. To Fred, she was still the girl with no real job, the one who was supposed to find something practical. And yet here she was, about to be recognized as one of the top under 30 billionaires in the world. It wasn't just a career milestone, it was a game changer. But a wave of conflicting emotions hit Patricia as she sat there in her small apartment, alone in the silence. What will they think? Her mind raced, filled with the memories of the countless times her father had dismissed her dreams. The moments when he had laughed off her ambitions, calling them childish or unrealistic. Her father had always been a traditional man. His success, built from years of hard work in business, had always come with a clear path, one that he'd mapped out for his daughter since she was little. You need a job that's stable, Fred always said. You need something you can rely on. Marketing isn't a real career, Patricia. Patricia had always resented those comments. She had been determined to prove him wrong, to carve out her own path in a world that often didn't make room for women with big dreams. But now that she had done it, part of her hesitated. The Forbes recognition was a dream realized, but it also meant revealing the truth to her family. Could she face the judgment, the disbelief? Would her father finally be proud of her, or would he mock her again, as he had done so many times before? She closed her eyes and let out a long breath. The excitement still lingered, but there was an undercurrent of doubt that she couldn't ignore. What if this success was never enough for him? What if he still didn't see her as capable, no matter how much money she made? Patricia knew that revealing her success was the right thing to do, but she also understood the cost. It meant facing the years of criticism, the late-night doubts, and the constant pressure to conform to everyone else's expectations. It meant finally showing her father the magnitude of what she had accomplished. But as she read the invitation again, the excitement returned. More vivid this time. She had earned this. She had fought for this. No one else has seen my struggle, but I have. I've made it this far, and now it's time to show the world. It's time to show him. With a deep breath, Patricia clicked the confirmation button. The event was in just a few weeks, and she needed to prepare. She could already picture the faces of her family as she walked into the gala, their jaws dropping as they realized just how much she had achieved. The validation she had longed for was finally within reach, but more than that, she was about to reclaim her power. The Forbes email had changed everything. Patricia was no longer the girl who was quietly dismissed at family gatherings. She was about to be recognized as one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the world, and nothing would ever be the same. As Patricia prepared to face her family, the excitement mixed with uncertainty. For years she had hidden her success from them, keeping it as a secret for her own protection. Now, she was at the precipice of a moment that would change everything. The truth would come out, and with it, the question remained. How would they react? Would Fred finally see her as the person she had always hoped to be? Or would he continue to dismiss her, as he always had? As Patricia sat there, contemplating her next steps, she knew one thing for sure. Her success was hers alone. Whether or not anyone else understood it was irrelevant now. Patricia had earned her place on the list, and she would make sure the world knew it. The email from Forbes still sat on Patricia's phone, a constant reminder of the opportunity she had been given. Every time she picked it up, her fingers would hover over the screen, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Should she reveal her success now, or wait? The family camping trip was just days away, and the thought of seeing them again, especially her father Fred, made her stomach churn. She sat at her desk, staring at the phone, the blinking cursor of her email app mocking her indecision. Do I send this out now? Do I tell them everything? The anticipation was suffocating. On one hand, there was a part of her that wanted to share her success immediately to bask in the validation, to see Fred's face when he realized his daughter had become a global success. But on the other hand, the fear of their reaction, the mockery, the disbelief, the need to justify her choices made her hesitant. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Still no job, Patricia? His words felt like they had been branded into her memory. It wasn't the first time he had belittled her ambitions, but every time it happened, it stung just as much. He'd always painted her dreams as childish, unrealistic, a hobby, not a career. She had worked so hard to prove him wrong, yet now, facing the reality of her success, she wasn't sure she was ready to confront his dismissiveness head-on. What if it doesn't change anything? Patricia thought. What if he just brushes it off as luck? She knew Fred well enough to understand that pride and stubbornness ran deep in him. He had spent his entire life climbing corporate ladders, and the idea of someone achieving success through unconventional means was foreign to him. Could she really face him and her family now, after all these years of quietly proving herself? The camping trip loomed large in her mind. Every year, the same routine. The summer gathering at the family's old cabin in the mountains, complete with stories around the fire, long hikes through the woods, and the unspoken tradition of Fred being the voice of authority, the self-proclaimed expert on how things should be done. Patricia always felt like the outsider in these moments, the one who didn't fit into the mold Fred had built for her. And this year would be no different, except it would be. The weight of the secret she had been keeping pressed on her, pulling her in two directions. She felt a surge of excitement at the thought of finally telling them, but it was quickly followed by a wave of dread. What if they mock me again? What if the success she had fought so hard for was diminished by their judgment? For years, Fred's harsh words had echoed in her head, shaping the way she viewed herself. Every time he told her that she wasn't doing enough, that her dreams were too big, she felt a little smaller. It had become a pattern, one she had carried with her like a burden. And now, she was about to find out whether her success could be a shield to protect her, or whether it would only expose her to more of the same ridicule. Patricia leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, letting the thoughts flood over her. Flashbacks of previous summers and family dinners came rushing in. She could still hear Fred's voice during one particularly heated conversation 2 years ago, when he had once again downplayed her ambitions. You know, Patricia, Fred had said, a knowing smile on his face, people like us don't get rich by chasing pipe dreams. You need to stop wasting your time on this. What did you call it? Marketing thing? It's not a real job. You need to start thinking about your future. I know what's best for you. At the time, Patricia had fought back tears. She had spent so many nights lying awake, wondering if he was right, if her dreams were truly unrealistic. But then, she had pushed forward. She kept working on her business, day and night, no matter how much Fred belittled her choices. The wounds his words had left would never fully heal, but they no longer held the same weight. Every rejection, every doubt, only served to push her harder. She had built her business from the ground up, using the very skepticism she faced as motivation to prove herself. And now, the reward was here, the recognition she had worked so tirelessly for. She was no longer the girl who had to justify every decision to her father. She had done it on her own, in her own way. She was a top billionaire under 30, a powerful force in the marketing world. But for some reason, knowing that this moment of success was at her fingertips only made the fear of rejection more palpable. She had worked for this, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the consequences of finally telling her family. Patricia's thoughts shifted to her mother, who had always been supportive of her. Though her mom was quietly proud, she had never made waves. She was always the peacekeeper, never openly challenging Fred's harsh assessments. But in Patricia's heart, she knew her mother believed in her. Yet, it was Fred's approval or lack thereof that loomed largest in her mind. What would he think now? She had never stopped to consider how his feelings might change once he realized just how wrong he had been. Would he admit it? Would he feel embarrassed? Or would he simply continue to brush it off as luck? The tension in Patricia's chest grew as she sat in silence, her fingers still hovering over her phone. She didn't want to reveal her success as a way to prove him wrong. She wanted to show him that she had built something meaningful, not for his approval, but for herself. She had to remind herself of that. This wasn't about rubbing her success in his face. It was about owning her accomplishments and living in her truth. The next morning, the family would gather for breakfast before heading out for a hike, and the weight of her secret would still be there. She could tell them then, or she could keep quiet and let them continue to think she was still just chasing a dream. But deep down, Patricia knew that it was time. It was time to let go of the fear and let her success speak for itself. She took a deep breath and sent a quick reply to the Forbes email, confirming her attendance at the event. The decision was made. She would face her family, face Fred, and finally take her place in the world she had created on her own terms. The sun had set, and the family dinner was in full swing. The sounds of laughter and clinking silverware filled the air as everyone settled around the rustic wooden table in the cabin's large dining room. The aroma of grilled meats, fresh bread, and roasted vegetables lingered, but to Patricia, it all felt distant. She was lost in thought, her eyes tracing the shadows on the wall as her family engaged in casual conversation. Fred, as usual, was the center of attention, regaling the family with stories of his latest business venture. He held court, effortlessly guiding the conversation in his direction, and Patricia found herself shrinking back into the chair, watching his familiar posture, the confident way he leaned back, arms crossed, as if the world owed him its attention. Her father had always been the one to assert his dominance at the table, and she had spent her entire life trying to live up to his expectations. But tonight was different. The weight of the success she had quietly achieved pressed on her chest, a constant reminder that things had changed. For so long, she had let Fred's mockery dictate her worth, but tonight, she was no longer that same young woman, unsure of herself. Patricia had earned her place, and now it was time for her family to see that. As Fred launched into another boast about his latest project, Patricia felt her pulse quicken. She couldn't keep quiet any longer. She had hidden this part of herself for so long, but the moment had arrived. She had to confront the person who had been the biggest source of doubt in her life. Tonight, she decided, it all changes. It wasn't even 10 minutes into the meal before Fred's voice cut through her thoughts again. "So, Patricia," he said, a condescending smile on his face. "Any updates on that marketing thing of yours? Still playing with your little side hustle?" The rest of the family chuckled lightly, as they always did when Fred made his usual remarks. Patricia's stomach tightened, but she forced a smile. The familiar sting of Fred's dismissal was all too well known by now, but this time, it didn't hit her the same way. Instead of shrinking away, Patricia sat up straighter, the glimmer of determination in her eyes hidden beneath the calm exterior she carefully maintained. Fred's voice rose again. "Honestly, I still don't get how you think you're going to make any real money with that pipe dream. You know, Patricia, if you just got a real job, something stable, you wouldn't have to keep worrying about this side hustle nonsense." He chuckled, but it was a hollow sound, one that seemed to mock not just her, but everything she had worked for. The laughter around the table grew louder, but this time, Patricia didn't join in. She felt the weight of the Forbes email in her pocket, its presence almost suffocating, as if it was daring her to take the next step. Every word Fred spoke was a reminder of why she had kept her success hidden, but no more. The truth was bigger than any of their doubts, and it was time to set the record straight. The conversation continued, but Patricia's mind was elsewhere. She could feel the blood rushing in her ears, her heart beating faster as she tried to figure out the right moment. How would she do this? How would she break the news without making it seem like an act of revenge? She didn't want to be petty. She wanted them to see her for who she was, now a successful woman who had built something meaningful with her own 2 hands. And then, as if guided by some inner strength, Patricia reached for her phone on the table. The room fell silent for a brief moment as everyone noticed her action. Fred was still talking, but his words faded into the background. Patricia unlocked her phone and, with deliberate precision, pulled up the email from Forbes. She scanned the message one more time before turning the screen toward Fred. "Actually, Dad," she began quietly, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight, "I have an update for you." Fred, unaware of what was about to happen, raised an eyebrow and glanced at her phone. "What's this now?" he asked dismissively, clearly thinking it was just another one of her business-related emails. But as he read the words on the screen, his face froze. "Patricia," he said, the skepticism in his voice slowly fading. What is this? You're telling me you're a billionaire?" He let out a short laugh, but it was nervous, uncertain. The family, sensing the shift in the air, turned their attention to the phone. Fred's voice wavered slightly, as if unsure whether to believe what he was reading. "You, a billionaire?" The table went silent. Patricia could feel all their eyes on her, but she held her ground. She didn't need to explain herself, not anymore. Her success was no longer just a number on a screen. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sweat, and resilience. It was real. She was real. Fred blinked several times, staring at the email in disbelief. I don't understand," he muttered, his voice low. "This doesn't make any sense. You're telling me, after all these years of doubting your little side hustle, you're actually a billionaire?" His disbelief was palpable, his words now bordering on a mix of confusion and regret. The rest of the family, once laughing, was now entirely silent. No one knew how to react. Patricia could see the shock on their faces, their inability to reconcile the young woman they'd all mocked for so long with the success that stood before them. It was almost too much for them to process, but for Patricia, it felt like the release she had been waiting for. Taking a deep breath, she stood up from the table, her calm demeanor hiding the emotional weight of the moment. "Yes, Dad, a billionaire. I've worked hard for this, and it hasn't been easy. You've doubted me every step of the way, and I've kept quiet, but I'm done hiding. My business has grown, and I've achieved what I set out to do, not for your approval, not for anyone's approval, but because I believed in myself." She looked around the table, her family's stunned faces reflecting the disbelief and regret that filled the air. Fred remained silent, his earlier arrogance now replaced with a quiet, almost hesitant pride. Patricia's voice softened, but the power in her words still rang clear. "I'm not doing this to rub it in your face. I'm doing it because I deserve to be seen not just as the girl with no real job, but as someone who worked tirelessly to build something that matters." For the first time in years, Patricia felt something she hadn't expected to feel: freedom. She had released the burden of her family's judgment, and in doing so, had given herself the power to finally acknowledge her own worth. Fred's face softened, a flicker of realization crossing his features. The weight of his words from years past hung heavy in the silence, but now it was clear that he understood Patricia had proven herself, and no mockery could take that away. The tension in the room slowly began to lift. Fred cleared his throat, and for the first time in a long while, he looked at his daughter not with disdain, but with pride. I'm proud of you, Patricia," he said, his voice quieter, less certain than usual, but full of sincerity. Patricia nodded, a small, content smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thanks, Dad. It means more than you know." And in that moment, she realized something that would change her forever. Success, real success, was about more than just proving people wrong. It was about standing in your truth, owning your achievements, and finally feeling free from the weight of others' expectations. The dinner table, once filled with doubt, was now filled with the hum of reluctant admiration and the unmistakable taste of victory. The silence that followed Patricia's revelation hung in the air like a thick fog. Fred sat there, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. The initial shock had passed, but the weight of it still seemed to cling to him. His hands rested on the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the edges. He was at a loss for words, trying to process the realization that his daughter had achieved something he never thought possible. A billionaire? Patricia? Fred's usual confidence, the self-assuredness that came with years of running his business empire, now seemed hollow. It was as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. His daughter had done something he couldn't even comprehend, something that he had spent his life dismissing as a pipe dream. The truth was staring him in the face, and it was hard to swallow. He finally broke the silence, his voice softer than usual but tinged with an uncomfortable edge. I never expected this. Fred muttered, his eyes flickering from Patricia's face to the phone that she had shown him earlier. I always thought you needed something more stable. A real job, you know. Something with a clear path. Not this. He gestured vaguely toward the phone as if it was something foreign to him. Patricia, sitting across from him, listened in silence. She had been expecting this. Her father's pride had always been so tightly intertwined with his career, with the life he had built from the ground up. To see her defy his vision for her was unsettling, not just for him, but for her as well. She had longed for his approval, but now, as the weight of his words settled into the silence between them, she realized she didn't need it anymore. Fred's voice wavered as he continued, trying to find the right words but failing. I didn't mean to make you feel like you weren't doing enough. It's just, I thought you needed something solid, something you could count on. You know how hard this world can be, Patricia. I only wanted you to have security, to have stability. The words stung, but not the way they used to. Patricia didn't feel anger rising within her this time. Instead, there was a strange sense of clarity, a kind of peace that had been missing for so long. Fred's words were laced with regret, but they no longer had the power to dictate how she felt about herself. Patricia had spent so much time trying to prove to Fred and to herself that she was capable. She had kept her successes hidden, waiting for the moment when she could finally show him what she was capable of. But that moment, the one that had come so suddenly, had made her realize that her success had never been for him. It had always been for her. She leaned forward slightly, meeting Fred's gaze with a calmness she had never been able to muster before. Dad, she began, her voice steady and clear. I understand now why you wanted me to have something stable, something secure. I really do. But the truth is, I didn't need your approval to succeed. I've been building something I believe in, something that makes me proud. But hearing you say you're proud of me, it means a lot more than I thought it would. Fred looked up, his face softened, and Patricia could see the faintest glimmer of recognition in his eyes. It was the first time he wasn't looking at her like a disappointment, like someone who was chasing unattainable dreams. He saw her, now really saw her. Patricia continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. I've worked so hard for this, Dad. For years I kept quiet, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew I needed to prove something to myself, to know that I could make it on my own. But now, I realize I didn't need to prove anything to you. It was about finding my own path, and I'm finally walking it. There was no anger in her words, no desire to rub her success in his face. Patricia wasn't trying to punish Fred for his years of doubt. She wasn't trying to show him that she had been right all along. No, this moment wasn't about proving anything. It was about her standing in her truth, in the success she had earned, and knowing that she had finally come to a place where her worth wasn't defined by anyone else's perception of her. Fred remained silent for a moment, his face unreadable as he absorbed her words. Then, finally, he spoke again, his voice quiet, but full of sincerity. I've been so focused on my own idea of success for you that I never stopped to consider yours. I was wrong, Patricia. I thought I knew what was best for you. But you've done more than I ever thought you would, and I'm proud of you, truly. The admission hung in the air between them, awkward and yet strangely liberating. Patricia could feel the weight of the past few years of tension lifting, replaced by something she hadn't expected, mutual understanding. The harshness of Fred's criticisms, the dismissals, they didn't disappear. But in that moment, they didn't hold power over her. She could let them go. I know I didn't always show it, Fred continued, his voice cracking slightly. But I am proud of you, more than you know. I never imagined this, Patricia. I never imagined you a billionaire. He shook his head in disbelief, as if the realization had yet to fully sink in. You've done something incredible, and I've been blind to it. Patricia smiled softly, feeling a sense of release she hadn't expected. For years, she had sought her father's approval, and for the first time, it felt like she didn't need it anymore. She had built something on her own, and while Fred's validation was meaningful, it was no longer the only thing that defined her success. Thank you, Dad, Patricia said, her voice warm but firm. It means more than you know to hear you say that. But this success, it's mine. It's always been mine. Fred nodded, his face softening as he leaned back in his chair. You've earned it, Patricia. You've earned all of it. He looked at her with a mixture of pride and regret, and Patricia could tell that he was finally understanding that his daughter had succeeded in her own way, not because of his approval, but in spite of his doubt. The emotional release Patricia had been holding onto for so long finally found its way to the surface. It wasn't about bitterness or revenge. It was about releasing the weight of years of feeling like she wasn't enough. As she sat there, across from her father, she realized that the true victory wasn't in proving Fred wrong. It was in proving to herself that she was capable, that she was worthy, and that she could do it all on her own terms. And for the first time in a long time, Patricia felt free. The dinner had wound down, the chatter and clinking of plates slowly fading as everyone retreated to the living room for after-dinner drinks. But Patricia remained at the table, her mind still swirling with the events of the evening. The tension had dissipated, but the weight of the conversation with Fred lingered in the air like an unspoken promise. She had expected a confrontation, but the acknowledgement of her success had come much differently than she had imagined. It wasn't a grand victory over Fred's doubts, it was a quiet reckoning, one that left her feeling strangely light, even though the past years of frustration hadn't disappeared. As she pushed her plate aside, cleaning up the crumbs from her meal, she heard the soft creak of the door behind her. She turned, her eyes meeting Fred's as he stepped into the room, his usual confident posture now replaced by something more vulnerable. There was no smile on his face, no joking remark to ease the tension. Instead, his expression was one of quiet contemplation, as if he were carrying something heavy. "Patricia," Fred said, his voice softer than usual. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Patricia nodded, unsure of what to expect. She'd always been the one to initiate conversations with her father, always the one fighting for validation, but tonight felt different. There was an air of humility in his voice that she hadn't heard before. She followed him out to the porch, where the cool night air hit her face, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the dinner table. The stars above twinkled faintly, and the sound of crickets filled the silence between them. Fred didn't speak immediately, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as he looked out over the darkened landscape, his face unreadable. After a long moment, Fred finally spoke, his words slow and deliberate. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened tonight." His gaze shifted toward Patricia. I owe you an apology, a big one." Patricia froze, unsure of how to respond. An apology? From Fred? The man who had spent so many years doubting her, dismissing her dreams as something less than worthwhile? Fred continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong about you, Patricia. Wrong about your career, about the path you chose. I thought I knew what was best for you, but I didn't. I kept pushing you to follow a path that was safe, but what I didn't see was that you were already building something for yourself. Something real. Something bigger than I could have ever imagined." Patricia's chest tightened. She had always known that her father's expectations for her had been rooted in his desire to protect her. But hearing him say it, hearing him admit that he had underestimated her, felt like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. Fred's voice faltered for a moment, the words clearly difficult for him to say. "I've spent my whole life focused on security, on what I thought would keep you safe. I wanted you to be stable. I wanted you to avoid failure. But I was so narrow-minded. You didn't need security, you needed the freedom to chase your dreams, to build something on your own terms." Patricia's heart softened as she listened. She had spent years resenting her father's constant insistence on stability, but hearing him express his regret in such a raw, vulnerable way was both surprising and moving. The pride he had always shown in his own work, in his own success, was now being extended to her. But it was complicated by years of criticism and judgment, and that realization wasn't lost on Patricia. "I'm proud of you, Patricia," Fred said, the words hanging between them, heavy and sincere. "I never imagined you would get this far. You've proven me wrong in every way, and I'm proud of you, even if it took me this long to see it." Patricia's throat tightened at his words, but she fought to keep her composure. Her father had always been the one to provide the blueprint for what success looked like, and it had taken a long time for her to realize that success wasn't just about following that blueprint, it was about defining it for herself. But hearing him admit his shortcomings, his pride, gave her something she hadn't realized she needed: acceptance. Not just from the world, but from him. She placed a hand on his arm, her voice soft but steady. "Dad, you didn't need to apologize. I get it. I understand now that you were just trying to protect me. You thought you were doing what was best for me. And, honestly, I spent so much time wanting your approval, thinking I wasn't enough without it. But I've learned that I don't need to rely on anyone else's approval to define my success." Fred's eyes glistened, the faintest hint of regret crossing his features. "I didn't want you to fail, Patricia. I wanted you to be happy, to be secure. I didn't see that what you were building was real. And now, I see it. I see you." Patricia's chest swelled with emotion, but she held it in check, her heart full in a way it never had been before. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly. "It means more than you know to hear you say that." For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, the weight of their shared understanding settling in. Fred stood there, looking at Patricia as if seeing her for the first time not just as his daughter, but as a woman who had made her own way in the world. His pride, though complicated by years of doubt, was genuine now. Patricia knew that. "I never imagined you'd be where you are today," Fred said quietly, his gaze distant. "But I should have. You've always had it in you. I'm proud of you. I'm really proud of you." Patricia smiled softly, a warmth spreading through her. This moment wasn't just about his apology, it was about him seeing her for who she had become. It was about acknowledging the distance she had traveled, not just in her career, but in her own journey of self-discovery. "I don't need your approval anymore, Dad," Patricia said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "But hearing you say that makes me feel like I've finally done it. On my own terms." Fred nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a level of pride and understanding that had long been missing. "You've done it, Patricia. I see that now, and I'm proud to be your father." For Patricia, that was all she needed to hear. The years of doubt, the ridicule, the constant push for stability, all of it faded into the background as she embraced the freedom of knowing that she had built something on her own, and that, in the end, was the most powerful success of all. Patricia sat on the porch, the cool morning air wrapping around her as she looked out, over the expansive view of the family cabin's property. The trees were beginning to show signs of fall, their leaves turning shades of gold and crimson. A new season was unfolding, and for Patricia, it wasn't just the change in weather, it was the change in her life. She had always looked for external validation, for the approval of those around her, but that had never been more evident than with her father. Years spent trying to meet Fred's expectations, trying to prove that she was more than just a dreamer, had shaped the person she had been. But now, as she looked out at the quiet serenity of the landscape before her, she realized that her success was never truly about proving her father wrong. It had been about proving to herself that she was capable, that she could do it, no matter what anyone thought. Her phone buzzed beside her on the table, a gentle reminder that the world kept moving, even as she reflected on her journey. Fred had called her earlier that morning, asking her to meet him in his office. At first, she had been unsure whether it was a casual conversation or something more significant. But as she walked to his office, she realized that this meeting wasn't about the business. It was about closure, growth, and moving forward. When she arrived, Fred was already seated behind his desk, a pile of documents stacked neatly beside him. As usual, his posture was authoritative, but his eyes held something different, something she hadn't seen before. Pride, mixed with a hint of vulnerability. "Patricia," he said, his voice steady but with a noticeable warmth. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened lately. I don't just want to acknowledge your success, I want to support you. I know I've been hard on you, but I was wrong about so much, and I want to make it right." Fred leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "I've been building my own company for decades, and I've always thought I had the perfect blueprint for success. But watching you build something entirely on your own, something that's your own, it's given me a new perspective. I'm proud of you, Patricia. I don't think I've said that enough, and I'm sorry for how I've treated you." Patricia felt the weight of his words, but it wasn't just his apology that impacted her. It was the sincerity in his eyes, the understanding that he had come to after all these years. He had come to see her as more than just his daughter, more than the girl who had failed to follow the prescribed path he had set for her. She was his equal, and that meant more than any financial success she could ever achieve. Fred's voice broke through her thoughts. "I've been thinking," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "I want to offer you a position in my company. It's the least I can do to show my support. You've proven you can succeed, and I think we could do great things together." For a moment, Patricia was taken aback. The offer was unexpected, but not unkind. Fred was offering her a chance to work alongside him, to step into a role in his well-established business, where she could put her skills to use in ways she hadn't imagined. It was tempting, but the more Patricia thought about it, the more she realized that accepting this offer would mean stepping into a life that wasn't truly hers. It would mean following a path that Fred had already laid out for her, just like he had done for so many years. Patricia looked at her father, her eyes clear and unwavering. She knew what she had to say. "Dad, I'm honored by the offer, truly, but I've built something for myself. I've worked hard to create something that reflects who I am and what I believe in. I don't need to follow your path to prove my worth. I've carved my own, and that's enough for me." Fred's expression softened, and for the first time in their relationship, Patricia saw not just the businessman, but the father who was proud of his daughter's accomplishments. He didn't seem disappointed. Instead, there was a quiet understanding in his gaze. "I get it," he said, nodding slowly. "I do. I've always wanted you to succeed, but now I see that your success doesn't look like mine, and that's okay." Patricia smiled, her heart full. She had said the words that needed to be said, and she knew that her father had accepted them. The offer to join his company, no matter how well-intentioned, was no longer what she needed. What she needed was freedom, the freedom to continue on her own path, to follow her passion without the weight of anyone else's expectations holding her back. She had already proven to herself that she was capable. She didn't need to measure her success against Fred's blueprint. As she walked away from the meeting, Patricia felt a wave of liberation wash over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't tethered to anyone else's vision of success. She had done it. She had built her business on her own terms, and that was all that mattered. Patricia sat down on the porch again, the soft light of the evening casting long shadows over the yard. She closed her eyes, letting the cool air soothe her. She was free. She no longer needed external validation, and the burden of proving herself to Fred or anyone else had been lifted. Her success wasn't about the Forbes list, or the recognition, or even the financial milestones. It was about the journey she had taken to get here. She had learned to trust herself, to believe in her ability to create something meaningful, and that was the most important lesson of all. Patricia had arrived at her own definition of success, and now, more than ever, she was ready to embrace the future with open arms. Her path was her own, and that was enough. It had always been enough. The new beginnings she had longed for weren't just about her career, they were about stepping into her own power and embracing who she had become. Months had passed since that pivotal moment at the family dinner, when Fred had finally acknowledged Patricia's success. The time between then and now had been both transformative and healing, not just for Patricia, but for the entire family. What had once been a space of dismissive laughter and quiet mockery was now filled with an air of respect and, in some ways, admiration. Her story had become one of inspiration, not just for her father, but for everyone who had witnessed her journey from dreamer to billionaire. The family had slowly adjusted to the idea that the girl, with no real job, had become one of the top under 30 billionaires in the world. Fred, in particular, had worked hard to reconcile his initial doubts with the pride he now felt. It wasn't easy for him. He had spent years convinced that the only path to success was through a traditional career, one that provided stability and predictability. But over time, he had come to see that success didn't look the way he had imagined. Patricia's success wasn't about following a prescribed blueprint. It was about following her own heart, finding her own path, and doing so with unwavering determination. Every now and then, Fred would pull Patricia aside after dinner, quietly asking her about her latest project or offering his advice, though. This time, it came from a place of genuine interest, not skepticism. "You're really onto something with that," he would say, a note of pride in his voice, as though he were finally seeing her with new eyes. Their conversations had shifted from him trying to steer her toward his path to him simply wanting to learn about hers. And for Patricia, it was a quiet victory. The rest of the family followed suit, gradually letting go of the notion that Patricia's business was just a side hustle or a fleeting hobby. They watched her quietly from the sidelines, first with disbelief, then with curiosity, and finally with respect. Her name began to appear in more articles, her story being shared as an example of success achieved through persistence, innovation, and courage. They had seen her grow from someone uncertain about her future to a confident woman whose business acumen and entrepreneurial spirit couldn't be ignored. Patricia's relationship with her family had evolved too. While there was still some awkwardness at times, particularly with Fred, the space between them had shifted. He had apologized, and though it was never fully discussed again, the apology was understood. It was the unspoken acknowledgement of the distance he had traveled in accepting her choices, and Patricia now felt that she no longer had to defend herself. She didn't need to prove her worth to him or anyone else. The family gathered again at the cabin that summer, as they had for so many years before. The difference this time was palpable. Patricia's success had shifted the entire dynamic of their gatherings. Fred no longer dominated the table with stories of his own achievements. Now, the conversation flowed more freely, with everyone contributing and sharing stories not just about work, but about their personal lives, dreams, and struggles. Patricia no longer felt like an outsider at these dinners. She was a part of the conversation in a way that felt different, more equal, more real. As the evening wore on, Fred stood up to give a toast, a rarity for him. His voice, once brimming with authoritative commands, was now full of warmth and pride. He looked around the table, meeting each family member's gaze, before his eyes landed on Patricia. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he raised his glass. "I've been thinking about how far we've all come over the years," Fred began, his voice clear and strong, yet touched with a quiet vulnerability. "And I want to say, Patricia, that I'm proud of what you've done. When you first started down this path, I didn't understand it. I didn't see it for what it really was, but I do now." Patricia felt her heart swell with emotion as the family turned their attention to her. Fred continued, his words now tinged with both humility and pride. "You've not only made your mark in the business world," he said, looking directly at her, "but you've done it on your own terms. You've shown me that success isn't always about following the rules or doing what's expected. It's about believing in yourself, even when no one else does, and you've done that better than I ever could have imagined." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of Fred's words hanging in the air. Patricia felt the surge of emotion she had been holding back for months, and in that moment, she realized how much it meant to her, not to hear that she had won, or that she had proved him wrong, but that Fred, her father, could see her for who she truly was. "Cheers," Fred said, his voice cracking slightly as he lifted his glass. The family raised their glasses, and a genuine round of applause followed. Patricia smiled, her heart light, as she felt the respect and admiration from her family settle in her chest. It wasn't just the financial success. It wasn't the Forbes recognition. It wasn't even the offers from investors and partners who were eager to work with her. What mattered most was the quiet respect she had earned from the people who had once doubted her people, who had seen her as the dreamer, the one who wasn't playing by the rules. But now, Patricia knew the rules had changed. The story had changed. Later that evening, as the family relaxed by the fire, Patricia found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She looked around at the faces of her family, now genuinely proud of her, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. For so long she had craved their approval, especially Fred's. But now, as she sat there, comfortable in her own skin, she realized that her success had never been about them. It had always been about her. Her success had come from within. It wasn't defined by the number of zeros on a paycheck, or by the recognition of others. It was defined by the strength it took to forge her own path, to follow her passion even when the world, or her father, had said it wasn't possible. Patricia stood up, a slight smile on her lips as she looked around at the family gathered together. She was no longer the uncertain, apologetic daughter who had once tried so hard to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for her. She had carved out her own space in the world. She had done it, not because of anyone's approval, but because she believed in herself, even when no one else did. She walked over to Fred, who was sitting near the fire, and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Dad," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude, "for seeing me, for finally seeing me." Fred looked up at her, his eyes softened by the years of their complicated relationship. "I see you now, Patricia, and I'm proud of the woman you've become. You've done something incredible, and I will never doubt you again." As Patricia stood there, surrounded by her family, she realized that true success wasn't just about building a company or making money. It was about living authentically. It was about standing tall in the face of doubt, following your passion, and most importantly, believing in yourself. With a heart full of peace and pride, Patricia knew that her journey was just beginning. There would always be more challenges to face, but now she understood that as long as she stayed true to herself, she would always find the strength to rise. And with that, Patricia felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing she had already proven to herself that she could do anything. Patricia's journey wasn't just about success, it was about overcoming doubt, silence, and years of being underestimated. If her story taught you anything, it's that we all deserve to be seen, heard, and appreciated for our own unique paths. Don't let that lesson end here. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, or leave a comment if Patricia's struggle hit home for you. If you truly believe in the power of standing up for yourself, don't just walk away. Hit subscribe to keep these stories alive. Your support can make a real difference in someone's life today.